Good afternoon, everyone. Am I on? Okay. It's clear that we now have a policy session, and that already means a lot of people hang out in the coffee shop. What policy? Well, this is going to be really interesting. It's not policy as in politics. It is also no longer content. Looking at the fine-grained specifications of FDOs. We already run a little late, so we have 4 panelists and each had 7 minutes to say what they wanted to say, and then time for discussion. But I hope that each of them will be even a little bit shorter, then we will catch up on time. So what we will discuss this afternoon is a number of things. Okay, assuming that everyone signs by this afternoon the declaration, many of you have already signed, thank you. Let me first say about that I'm pretty ill prepared for this panel as a chair. Paolo is making the notes and is the rapporteur, so he's probably very well prepared, because I was wordsmithing on the declaration with many of you until late, but I'll try to do my best as a chair here, as a moderator. But the topic is really that we want to now say, okay, assuming that FDOs are going to be tried out next year, which we all hope, what does it mean? And who are the players and what is needed to make that efficient? And of course we have the academic players, we have the president of EOSC here, we'll come back to that in a second, but also the industry. So you have Dominik here, who is from industry, the commission, and then we also had Luisa Lavitrano, but she had to cancel at the very last minute, so we found Dimitris ready to replace her, which of course ends up with a manual, but sorry, that was not the intention. So but the idea is that we will discuss the connection between policy, industry, academia, but also other players like Naturalis, which is of course a research institute as well as a museum. I've teased, not yet had the chance to tease you with that, because Dimitris always said, we are not just a museum, we are not a museum, we are a research institute, a biodiversity research institute. Now, a few weeks ago, I think it's gone now, there was this huge sign outside, elected as the best museum of Europe 2020. So, said, okay, I have to tease you with that. But anyway, so there is lots of players that are not classical academic research performing organizations. There is the TNOs, the Fraunhofers, the industry, the open science cloud types. So we try to bring together people from these various domains to discuss, okay, given that the technology and everything is okay and still has to be shaped in the year to come, what are the consequences for policy, collaboration, and those kind of things? And how do we make it more formal? What will be needed there? So, Dominik, please, could you take your seat on the podium? Dimitris, Karel. And we are waiting for one other panelist who is coming in a sec. Oh, he's here. Great. Christian, go on stage. So I already told the panelists that I didn't even have time to read their CVs. Most of them I know, but not all. So they will start with their statements and also take 2 sentences to introduce themselves. I still want to say one thing about Karel. Sorry for his trousers. The trains were not running between Delft and Luyben. And Karel is so dedicated that rather than saying, okay, find somebody else, he jumped on the bike, typically Dutch, and he was here in time anyway. So, Karel. So, that is dedication to FDOs. Eh? So, let's start from this side and go all the way down to Dominik, and I'll leave it to you now. Please keep your time.
Hello, I'm Cuciniello. I'm policy officer at the European Commission. I work in the Open Science Unit in the Directorate General for Research and Innovation. Open science is something that I heard during this morning, and it's a policy of the Commission, for the Commission that aims at responding to the digital transition in science. Enhancing collaboration, bringing transparency towards sharing and sharing of scientific information, And of course, it comes with some things to do. I mean, to the aim of our policy is to make open science the new normal for researchers. But to do so, we need systemic changes, and those systemic changes are related to how we evaluate research, how we do research, how we share research. And here it comes the concept of the FAIR principles, how to apply those principles into the scientific process, how to help researchers to embrace the open science practices. And the Commission is there to listen to the needs of the scientific communities and to respond. Is not there to take decision on behalf of the scientific communities. Therefore, in what you are presenting in these 2 days, these FDO environments, here we are not, at least from the Commission side, to decide what to do with those. We are here to listen and to try to better respond through our funding to the needs of the research communities. If the many research communities will adopt such framework that is not, from my understanding, changing the ways they do research, is just to adding some semantic super layer to be able to better interact with digital objects, then the Commission will surely support. What we do is to listen. We have stakeholders. We implement through funding together with the member states the European Open Science Cloud that has its core with fair data. That is an embedded concept in the European Open Science Cloud. And we have our stakeholders. Here, I think after me, you will hear the voice of the counterpart of the Commission in what we call the co-program partnership for the European Open Science Cloud. And we also listen to our stakeholders. So I, as from the side of a funder, I have to tell research communities to bring their voice, bring their needs, and if the FDOs are the way to go, the Commission surely will support such development, of course, within the already taken way towards the implementation of our policies.
Thanks. Karel.
Well, my name is Karel Luyben, as you already heard. I'm a biker, as you probably know by now. And I happen to be the president of the EOSC Association, which is indeed the representation of stakeholders in Europe. By the way, if you're a research institute, you're welcome as a stakeholder to be a member of the association. I'm still missing you. But the association has a MOU signed with the European Commission, and on the basis of this MOU, in a partnership, we try to establish what we call EOSC. Some people say EOSC is there already, other people say it's in the making. This is a discussion which is semantics as far as I'm concerned. It is in the making, and when it's there, it's not one day not there and the next day there. It's not something you turn the knob and then it's there. So this is semantics. The EOSC was defined by Ursula von der Leyen about 2 years ago in a Davos lecture as a web of scientific insight. I found that a nice expression. We tend to call it a web of fair data and services, and by end services we mean end related services on these data you can perform with the data. Compute, store, let's say, do the connections, and many other things if you have compute, connect and storage possibilities. The web of scientific insight is a beautiful metaphor, I think, for what we are trying to reach. And the basis of all this is a network, a federated structure, Therefore, the word cloud is rather misleading. Every week I have to explain it's not a cloud, it's a commons, and that federated structure is based on a number of principles. And one of the principles is that this is done for research. This is what you could call a data space for research. Not for the researchers. The researchers will benefit from it, but it's for the process the researchers do rather than for the research itself. This structure is being composed, being constructed by many, many partners. And what we try to do is sort of play a concerted action towards the development of this structure. FAIR is one of the principles underlying the whole system. And therefore, if we look at what are the probably initial steps we have to sort of solidify, then I would mention two. One is the AAI system. If we do not have a proper AAI system as wide as possible, for example, starting within Europe based on EduGain or other sources, then it's not going to bring very much. The second is if we want to establish this based on FAIR principles, and this is what we want, this is a principle of the EOSC, then we need machine actionable units of information, and the FDO concept could definitely play a role here in order to get the interoperability going. I tend to say within some disciplines there is interoperability. Between disciplines, seldomly. In the life sciences, I think you see some developments there. And across all the domains of disciplines, definitely not. So the first thing we need to do is to help the long tail of sciences to bring their standards forward, to get to these possibilities, bridge disciplines in order to get the interoperability going. But if I list what are the, let's say, bottlenecks, they are not technical. I mean, making an AAI and making machine actionable units of information is not an easy thing to do. But getting the noses in the same direction and adjusting this system for all the organizations in Europe, let alone in the world, is another thing. So I tend to say the following, and some people do not agree with me, that's good, then we have a debate. If in 2040, 50% of the research data, of the relevant research data, and by that I mean the research data found relevant by the researchers who did the research, is as fair as possible. And by as fair as possible, I mean according to the principles developed in 2040, then I would be very happy. But don't forget, this has to be done worldwide. Thank you.
Dimitris.
Thank you, Karel. My name is Dimitris Koureas. I'm the managing director for digital science and digital strategy in the organization, the CIO. I also have the pleasure of leading a European research infrastructure that tries to connect 170 museums in Europe. I had a few notes. I will throw them away because what Barend said really kicked me off. About being a museum and a research center, and I would argue that what we do as a museum and a research center, most of all, is acting as a place of convergence between society and science. We see ourselves as a place where we can deliver the promise of science directly to society. This is our mission, this is our goal, this is what we do as a museum, this is all museums are doing. So one of the observations we have as an organization like this is that we see more and more society moving from the physical realm into understanding themselves and acting in the digital realm. We move more and more from the our in situ, in vivo lives into the in silico lives. And it was very interesting to hear on Wednesday the artist talking about Julia, how basically she sees her digital twin through the eyes of Meta, for instance. So if that is the case, and we have a role as a museum and as an organization that tries to create that convergence, how do we act in the digital realm? How do we position ourselves in the digital realm? How do we bring science and the promise of science in the digital realm, at least from the point of view of biodiversity, for instance? You heard Mike the other day talking about that as an organization trying to describe life on this planet, we have made a progress of around 10%. We know 10 to 15% of all life on this planet. There is another 85 or 90% that is completely unknown to us. We know more about the surface of Mars than we know at the bottoms of our oceans. We've done this over the last 300-400 years. And at the same time, we're talking about how we need to basically completely change how we deliver against the biodiversity crisis. We realize that the only mechanism to do that is if we are assisted heavily by the intellectual capacity, not only of humans, but also from machines. How we can work together to scale up science. And this is where we are coming from. This is why an organization like this is organizing a conference like this, now, here. Because we see this as the only mechanism through which we can deliver. So we come from a very specific point of view, a vantage point that has to do with the utilization of FDOs potentially and their promise to deliver against the expectations that we have from technology and from data innovation for the purposes of science. And I think if we look ahead, how the FDO forum, because one of the questions I had, I remember, is what's the future? What are the stakeholders? How we need to proceed? Of course, the stakeholders are all science organizations, either directly or through their representations, for instance, in Europe, through European research infrastructures. That's undisputable, but that's not enough. We need also to create a framework through which all of this collaboration can yield the results we're looking for. And it's not really that difficult, is it? This is not about changing anything, destroying anything, apart from the egos of a few people, probably. This is about building on top of things that we already have. This is about accelerating rather than turning around. We are going to the right direction, I think. I'm not at all pessimistic. I see a lot of progress. I see it in my domain. I see it in other domains. I see it by the fact that you're all here over the last few days. So we're going the right way. It's all about accelerating. It's all about convergence. It's all around putting a positive agenda into the solution space that we have ahead of us. So there are two ways of looking into the future of the forum or the future of the FDOs. One is related to how FDOs represent a need and a concept that has to do how data needs to, and bit sequences need to come with meaning, how they need to become accessible. We've heard about all of these phrases over the last few days. How basically it's a responsibility of each one individually, but collectively as organizations and societies to understand that as we move ourselves into the in silico lives, it is extremely important that we maintain the context, the aura, as I said on Wednesday, of all of that information so that we can scale up. The other part is how we can, what do we need to do this? What is the components in that system that exist? Most of them already exist. We heard Bob Gunn on Wednesday talking about, of course, DONA and the DOI and the handle system. Many of them exist. Some of them still might need to be there. So if we just do this exercise, and if we agree on these key missing components that we need to maintain, then the next thing is to see who has the responsibility of maintaining them. And I think actually it's not a very difficult thing. It's just a matter of properly organizing ourselves, structuring ourselves, and taking the next step. So I will leave it on that positive note, and I'll give the floor.
Thank you. Next one, Dominik.
All of you are giving me now a hard time. What's the industry voice and answer on that? Oh my God. Dominik, I had the privilege to set up Gaia X. I was the former CEO until summer, since 2018. By the way, it started really in 2018, not 19 or 20. And now I'm with a pre-competitive non-profit association, really working on industry and Industry 4.0, as we call it, since 2011. Already that's 11 years old. And what are the key messages? All what has been said is very right, very true. From an industry perspective, two things are important: persistency, accountability. I was just recently attending a signing signature. You know how long the liability duration was for the signature? for this contract? 46 years. I might be dead in 46 years, and my poor guy after me in Siemens still has to handle all the civil legislative actions according to that product in the market being used by people on that planet Earth. And you know what? In 46 years, I have no idea if IEEE 802.1, the IP internet, is still in place such that this technology functions in this thing and can be maintained. And that brings me exactly to the point, standards and norms. So my recommendation for fair digital objects is really, you need to move, at least from an industry perspective, to something that you can refer to, and that is either standards or better, full consensus-based standards, which is norming. So standards needs 1 to 3 years, and norming usually 3 to 5 years, whatever, depends on how you do it. And I heard just during the coffee break that there are activities already going on in Germany, which is good. So I would say thumbs up. Possibly it's not so sexy, I agree, but it's kind of trying to get that way for decades, and that's how you need to think, I think, in that way. The other thing is still IP. That's a big problem, EOSC. So data, contracting around data, that's actually also where the Policy and Rules Committee in GAIA-X is really hard working on it, and it's not easy. It's a matter of interest, and it's certainly a civil topic you negotiate. Major projects being up in Europe, SCSN here in the Netherlands, Smart Connected Supplier Network. In Germany, Catena-X for the automotive. France, Eona-X, combining mobility and tourism. They really struggle on that topic, right? So you might say the data belongs to that or that, but it changes in the life cycle. So over time, that might change because this business model is changing. I cannot tell you how the business model of Catena-X in 20 years from now will be, but one thing is clear. Basically the governance structure, the governance setup, the operational companies, who earns money with what, why. So basically the licensing models, etc., also will come, and these discussions will come to you, to the FDO. I tell you, if you really put it forward to the next level, then collaboration, interaction with others that do it. In Germany, there was this, globally basically, the asset administration shell, we call it digital twin, invented. That's now a norm. All these things are very close to what FDO does, and you can be happy because you can build on that. I tell you, it's horror. I'm with Industry 4.0 since 2011, and in my 11th years. It's pure horror to build this up from scratch. Really build up on these things that exist and do the collaboration, coordination with them. I'm super proud of EOSC, really, I have to say. We just recently, Karel, I'm not sure if you know that, presented a slide where we put all these associations, like with Bubbles, some have hubs around globally, some only in Europe. There's also BDVA, for instance, taking care of AI in a very, let's say, application way. Then there are all the European Commission initiatives, IPSAI, European Project of Common Interest, super important. Many more cannot. And then there's the legislation, and I would like to sum up with this, and that brings me to that buzzword of data space. Please, I don't want to bash you with this. And there are now really taxonomies coming up. There's a glossar existing where we define it more and more. It's getting there. But the point is, European Commission, European Parliament is very active in that area. And what we realize as industry that we cross-vendor, in the vertical at least, have to collaborate. That was the initial kick for GAIA-X in 2018-19. Ideally cross-sectoral, so industry and finance, or industry and insurance, public sector and industry, whatever, combinations as you want. And why? Because if you look at the Data Act, if you look at the AI Act, if you look at the Future Cyber Resilience Act, you can't handle it by yourself. Even not if you're Bosch or Siemens or Airbus or BMW, or please, unlimited, continue, Thales, Amadeus, I could move on like across Europe. And if you cannot handle it, you need to collaborate. Then you have the problem of interoperability. There's brownfield all over this is so fragmented and heterogeneous. And whenever you want to have a connector, put 50,000 euros on individual cost, and that brings down your EBIT. So you need interoperability in a standardized way, and you need the willingness to exchange data. So we all need to be compliant with European laws, regulations. We have to, we want to, it's in our heart. And we still have to show the benefits. So it's not, we don't build data spaces because we need to comply with European laws. That would be too short jumped. That's very German. Short jumped. I have no idea how.
They understand.
No, it must be a value add. The value add is that you can create closed loop over the entire life cycle. So we really from the mine all the way to the phase out of the product, the recycling of the product. Circular economy needs it. CO2 reporting. You might always view that from a regulatory perspective. You can view it also from a business perspective, which is more in my heart. And it makes a whole lot of sense to do data sharing for this purpose. So purpose economy is the driver for data spaces. That's why you see those very successful ones. The one in the Netherlands, I want to repeat the name again, Smart Connected Supplier Network is a really cool project. And also Catena-X in Germany or Iona-X in France and many more. Please excuse if I don't list them all. They have a purpose. The purpose is data sharing for value adding, quality, getting the better product in the next generation because you can collect the data from now, having better engineering, and so on. So this is the purpose. And by that we can comply because we have a data space with the upcoming Euro. It fits together. Right? That's the message basically. And EOSC is doing that for research, which I fully support. It's really cool that you do it. And let's have a chat afterwards. That would be it from my side. Back to you.
Thank you. So now we are going to have questions for the panel. And of course, I'm supposed to ask a few first. I got a whole list from Peter, which I will throw away, of course. Now I'll ask some of them. But because you triggered a lot of possibilities, and then I think, looking at the time, we will have serious time for discussion as well with the rest of the audience. But the first thing I like to pick up is what you said, that we need persistence and a real responsibility, maybe even certification and standards at the end. Yeah. And then what Dimitris said, we don't do anything new in the sense that all the elements you have to piece together are there. It's not that we change science or anything, but as Rob always says, piecing things that exist together is roughly the same effort as building them from scratch, if not more. So it's not an easy task. And one of the things that I found during this conference, but also in the preparation, there is still a lot of semantic misunderstanding. So my good friend Mark Wilkinson, who's actually the first author of the article, I'm the corresponding author, so everybody sends stuff to me, but Mark it's always Wilkinson at all 8,000 times everywhere, but he couldn't be here because they took his passport, whatever, Brexit stuff.
Wow.
Anyway, Mark, if you're listening, so we have two things. We actually now summarize FAIR as the machine knows what I mean, okay, which is all what Karel said, machine actionable units of information. Now, a lot of the semantic problems, and I hope you can comment on that, is A, European data spaces or international data space is competing with EOSC or with FAIR data stations or whatever.
No.
We agreed when we started together with TNO and Fraunhofer and others that European data spaces are collections of FAIR data stations that can be visited. And even yesterday, when George gave his lecture, some people thought when he said one machine, one data set, some people sort of suggested that he meant a centralized data set. No, what he obviously meant is, I always say, stop data sharing, start data visiting. So the machines don't care where the data are, in which repository or wherever. They just go there, and if they understand stuff, you effectively have a global database. So coming to these 3 points, nothing new, confusion, can you, the last thing, let me say that first before we get your reactions. So the most time I spent on wordsmithing on the declaration that we have to sign this afternoon, or have to, those who want, was that, for example, Mark said, no, it should not be FAIR digital objects with capitals, like we see here, the D and the O. It should be small letters, because otherwise people see it as a brand name or something that's already there, while it is clear that it is the concept of machine actionable units of information, you need to have some minimal agreements to make that happen. But you can realize that in many different ways. And otherwise people think you have to do it the Peter Wittenberg way or the Herbert van der Zompel way or the whoever way. No, we hope, as George said yesterday, to get multiple implementations. So we have a year to come where we don't set a standard yet. We are just working together to come to this very minimal, the hourglass principle like this PIP. What do we agree on as the absolute minimum features and behaviors of a fair digital object? So what's your view first, Dominik, and then go down the line? Where are we, in your view, if we talk machine actionable units of information, fair digital objects, what would the industry need to see? What do we expect from this year? And what is needed to actually make this happen beyond having a nice piece of paper to wave around this afternoon? So maybe just go down the other way around as we begin.
I don't want to repeat myself what I said before, but my answer would be use cases. Show real examples, show real application scenarios where someone can benefit. It can be small, medium enterprises. That's quite interesting, actually, to think in that direction, because they are not only we know all that they are the backbone, they are 95% of all European industry, etc., etc. But they are usually very speedy, very dynamic. They are stressed at the moment due to the global circumstances. Financially, they are really under pressure, and they are looking for something that gives them a way forward for the future. So these concepts, they are a little bit unsure what data and data space and data sharing means for them. And I think if you leave them capitalized, it's more clear. Otherwise, the spell check might ask you, what are you doing? And,
okay, so let's go back, change the declaration. Okay, no.
I think if you could really do use cases and put small, medium enterprises, for instance, in the center, I think that could be an interesting option. It must be a value add. The value add must not be only euros or dollars. It can be quality, it can be anything, right?
And as you said, reproducibility, and as Jan said, one of the keynote speakers, that's a major crisis in science. So the improving reproducibility is important. So you said, okay, we need, at the end, we need standards and persistence and all these things.
But
do we agree that we are now entering a year, more or less, at least, where we first try this out, as George said yesterday, multiple applications, rough consensus, running code. That's the period we probably start now. And I will come back to you on the nothing new, but Karel, maybe you can say something then about the group that we had meeting earlier, which I call the Karels of this world, from Africa, from Canada, from the US and so on. We had a very good and productive meeting, and that group also contains the 4 international organizations that work on data and have the data in their main headline, RDA, CoFair, CoData, and WDS, the World Data System. And we came to a conclusion that we need to find a way to get critical mass to start trying this out in a coordinated way, and then it may actually drive this bottom-up standard setting by default, because it appears to be the thing that works. So Karel, can you say anything about that, what you feel is needed? Do we need a new legal entity to watch over digital objects? How do we do this feedback during that year to make sure this becomes a coordinated effort and a convergence?
Basically, if Barend asks a question, you probably only have to say yes. He already explained the whole thing beforehand. But anyway, what we did, we had a meeting with a group called OSCAR, Open Science Commons Executive Roundtable, it stands for, a nice abbreviation. And then we tried to bring together the different regions of the world and those people that have influence in these regions with respect to the developments on, let's say, commons for research that are taking place. And in that group, beforehand already, we said the declaration is a nice thing, but we need action. We do not need only declarations we can put in the drawer and look at it next year and say, interesting declaration again. No, we need the steps to implement those things that are essential to move forward. So we set up a call for action, which was still drafting at the moment in the final form, but we intend with all OSCAR members to underline that within the year that is coming, we do our very best to have those organizations we can influence or we even can control in some cases, have a test going on this concept, that we evaluate this and get engaged in the evaluation, and that at the end of the year we come together again after having contact in the meantime, and then analyze whether it needs to be modified, it needs to be killed, or it can continue. Basically 3 options if I make it very simple. Of course, the reality will be more complex than that, but the intention is that the different regions in the world do their best to find use cases where this is actually implemented and where we can, in a year time, maybe a little bit longer, but in a short period of time, find out which direction this needs to move. Whether you need a legal entity for that, I'm doubtful. I tend to say, as you said this week, I think, Einstein said, don't make it as simple as possible, but don't make it too simple. He forgot one thing, don't make it legal. He should have added to that. And there you should be asking a question whether you should do that. But let's leave that open for the time being. I would say having a group forum is a good format to look after this and to, let's say, help us evaluate the things that are happening in the different use cases is of use. And I will definitely try within the realm of the European Open Science Cloud to find initiatives that can try this out and contribute to this.
Okay. So Dimitris, you want to react first before I
would like to react,
Okay,
yes.
go ahead.
What's the reason a legal entity becomes a legal entity?
Mm-hmm.
The only reason an organization would like to become a legal entity because this allows it to achieve its mission and objectives in an easier and more efficient way. So if we see what the forum's objectives are, then we need to see basically whether the existing environment and structures allow to reach its objectives without a legal entity or with a legal entity. I don't really know. I don't really care, actually. What I care about is the following. We do have what are the components we have? We have already a fantastic network of organizations around data, the data together. RDA, CoData, GoFair, WDS. We have already a fantastic space in which science policy enables, promotes openness, and pushes everyone towards that direction. From the Commission, EOSC, everyone. We have the technology. We have the experts. We have research infrastructures that are there ready to say, yes, we're here and we're ready to implement. What do we miss? Why is this not happening?
IP,
we miss
IP, operational company, maintenance, life cycle, blah, blah, blah.
And also
if those are the things we're missing, which I agree, and the case studies and the use cases, the implementations, then I think that's what the forum needs to be doing.
Now, and also the 4 organizations you mentioned don't have very structural links to the industry. And even one of the fights that Karel and I have had is I thought industry should have been involved earlier in EOSC, but don't go there. The idea is that it's never too late, and it's probably the right time, you know, I might be wrong. But bringing the industry and the public sector together and getting some mandate, it's not about legal entity, it's mandate. And I think that's, for me, the best outcome of the OSCAR meeting, that the 4 international organizations, but also FDOF, and it's also a GoFair implementation network, of course, would for now, for the coming year, I think be enough. But then we have to agree that we sort of pool our experiences and we have a place.
Yeah, but we're discussing about whether the forum should have a legal entity or not, as if it's a goal. This is not a goal.
Absolutely not.
There's no one's goal. Nothing to be gained from that unless something is to be gained.
Okay. So let's move on.
May I react to something Dimitris said earlier? We have all the pieces basically, and he was very optimistic, and I like that. I'm a very optimistic person as well. But having all the pieces and putting them together is more difficult than making it from scratch. And as you said, we may lose a few egos on the way.
Well, that is one thing, but still, Dimitris, when I read the abstracts for the conference here, and I was hardly able to go to the sessions, but looking just at the titles, and I don't want to put any lightning away for the reports in the last session, my impression was that many of those abstracts already claim they have an up and running FDO system. Maybe not perfect yet, maybe professorware, as we say, but it works, you know. And so I was always very impressed and use it a lot of times, that I heard you say that essentially you consider that you have 1.3 billion fair digital objects as fair digital twins of specimens that are somewhere in a drawer here. Can you allude on that a little bit as an example? That we don't have nothing and we have to build this from scratch. So
yeah, so what I was saying before is what we're trying to see in the collections world, at least natural science collections world, is how we can move those objects out of the limitations of the physical into the commons, into the digital space, and enable community curation, community stewardship of the scientific information linked to all of those objects. This is essential if we want to scale up at an order of magnitude, because that's what we need. We cannot do this by bringing an order of magnitude more people here. We can only do it if we take that and put it out there. So the only mechanism for us to do this is if we take all of those objects and create their research equivalent or research equivalently capable research, digital surrogates. That's what we need to do. And fair digital objects as a concept is exactly what that allows us to do. We are trying to do it within the DISCO research infrastructure. We can do it. We don't see anything that is really missing apart from the commitment and the persuasion that we have to have for other people to say that this is the way forward. But there's something missing, which is basically we don't really know if what we are delivering is the right thing to deliver. We're going in the dark. We say, well, this is probably what we need to do. This is what everyone is saying. We're going this direction, and we hope that this is the direction we need to take. So it would be great if we had some more guidance, for instance, to say, okay, these are the key things that you need to be careful as you attack this problem. And I think that's what the forum needs to be doing. How we help with, you said standardization, best practices, you can call it whatever you want. Karel said, okay, the components are there, but putting things together is actually difficult. It is. Absolutely. And I think that's what we need as a forum to be focusing on so that we can help organizations like this one and DISCO to be more confident about the commitment they already have towards that.
And I also would argue that everyone that is in the leadership of the forum is either a member of all of the 4 organizations, RDA as you mentioned them, or at least 2 of them. So there is the need that the major players, the executives in industry and so on, are taking this group seriously. But nothing legal entity needed, I think. But we have a mandate to say, okay, we will collect these things. And I always like what George said also yesterday. In the early days of the internet, they wouldn't accept a spec unless there were minimally 2 independent implementations that showed that the spec is not like a rigid standard. But then, of course, at some point you get convergence to that spec. So that is, I think, what we needed. But then I would like to switch to you, but also challenge you a little bit, because you said a few. Okay, you first want to react? Okay,
yes, just quickly. I agree that things can be done no matter a legal entity or exist or not. But when they reach a certain level where accountability is important, where you need a reference, if you want to present a standard, the standard has to be presented by a legal entity. So unless there is someone within the forum that, for me, is mainly a network of people, let's say, bring his organization in the game and then take the lead to present such a standard, or let's say to be the torchbearer for the others, then if you are not in that situation, you need to have a legal entity. So for the time being, as soon as things are developed, it's fine, but when they reach the status of we are ready to deploy something, and to deploy is the minimum element to define the minimum elements to define an FDO, then you need, I think, a certain stability.
Yeah, which could be an existing one, of course, that is already operational on the internet or the web. or a new one. But that, if we need it, of course, then the need is there, as Dimitris also said. Now your challenge.
Yeah, challenge.
So you said a few times decommission. Now I was, before Karel stepped in and took over all the hard work, I was chair of the high-level expert group to shape the EOSC years ago, 2016. Jean-Claude was my boss. He cannot be here, but he says hello. And there was already a fight between Connect and RTD in the sense that they had different visions on what this all should be. Look in the Netherlands, we have the industry, Ministry of Economic Affairs, you have the Ministry of Science, you have the Ministry of Health, and there is a lot of confusion there. So is there a chance that if we gather around this very minimal thing like fair digital objects, that we can agree on that? Because you see, when I was in this group, we got all these messages, which I also recognize, that people that are engineers and build infrastructure, they think they built the best thing since sliced bread. And then I say, well, I have no idea. This is not what I need, you know. So as Karel said, we built this for research, and the researchers will benefit, but we need the engineers and the technical people. They speak different languages. You say model, everybody has, even on the term model, they have completely different views on what that is. So is there a chance that this exercise will also weed out a number of these persistent, misunderstandings also between the different parts of the Commission?
Well, let me say that a few years passed. So, I honestly started working in the Commission in 2009, and I was in the e-infrastructures unit, so in DG Connect. And now I'm in the Open Science unit of the GRTD. So I live the two words of the more technical understanding and the more, let's say, abstract approach towards the EOSC as a web of fair data. I have to say that thanks to the work that has started in 2018-19 with the EOSC executive board, with the steering board, with the working groups of the executive board, we had the chance of having in these working groups technical people and and people with a more abstract, let's say, approach. And they started talking together. And despite there is still some, let's say, loose pieces in the translation, what we are now facing is exactly what you said. This is now what this is not what I asked. Okay. Because then you asked something to someone and then you left and you expected that someone to provide you what you wanted. But bringing close the needs and the developers, then you have a much higher understanding from the developer what are the needs. One of the questions here, there are some hidden stakeholders. Yes, there are. The providers, okay? Don't underestimate who they were, the infrastructure provider, and who are now let's say, the infrastructures that are meant to be federated within this federating core of EOSC. They have the technical background and they know the limitations that exist to consider an object fair. We have a clear idea of, it's clearer day by day, of a data set that is fair. But here we are talking about objects. What is fair? Can a service be fair? So then a service is also accompanied by metadata because we build catalogs around that. And having those people listening to what are fair data, then they can help also to append new metadata and to, let's say, modify the system to bring it closer to the needs not only of the researchers, but to the higher needs of having the knowledge spread and distributed. And yes, the answer is yes. We are closer to, let's say, filling the gap that there is between the two different point of views from the abstract that you can easily, that you described as RTD, no? And the more technical that you described as Connect. We are working together and we are talking every day, and we are, let's say, embracing a common language now.
That's the best news I heard today. So we now have half an hour and 1 minute to take questions from the audience. I have another one, but I will not pose it until there is no other questions. So I would also challenge maybe if some of the other Oscar members to say something or ask something, but it's open to everyone. So it's very difficult in the lights to see. There's a question there. This is your chance, these guys can make a difference. So,
yeah, first, thank you very much for this nice and interesting discussion. So my question is about the implementation, concrete implementation and the standards. So do you think that we are at the stage where we need well-defined standards and we force people to follow them? Or we keep them relaxed as they are now and people can diverge like they are doing and come up with different implementations and can even maybe update the standards that we have now? Thank you.
If you want, I can take that question. It's a fundamental question being raised since 107 years. The first standard was a mechanical standard to enable interoperability. In those days, machine builders had different tables, and they were all on different heights, so the material couldn't flow. And then they invented this thing, and then the table were balanced and material was flowing. One of the prerequisites beside conveyor for Ford, for instance, it was, by the way, a German norm, industry norm, they call it. And that's exactly the question they had in those days. Where does proprietary or fragmentation or heterogeneous life stop? So it's in the end a question of the market decides, right? If a proprietary system works really well, and that's not a criticism, don't get me wrong. I make a very different data example. Amazon Web Service invests, to my knowledge, $1 billion a month. The software is working really well, very reliable. It's mostly proprietary. The market is using it. I don't want to judge on any reasons it's using it, otherwise they would not have that success. It's one way forward. You can do that. The other way is, and we are here very fragmented in Europe, very heterogeneous. I have personal experience on that, and I quite suffer from that since decades. Then standards and norms help you to have interoperability with your Marktbegleiter, we say in Germany. So it can be a competitor or a collaboration partner or both in one. And then you start negotiating to find something. With respect to data, there's lots of standards out there, including connectivity standards, interoperability standards, semantic information modeling, etc., etc. I strongly recommend to use that, again, not to reinvent the wheel because it's very painful, very expensive. That's what I mean with painful. And adapt to them. If something is missing, raise your hand and point the finger. That would be my short answer.
Dimitris also wants to react. Then we have Paolo, our rapporteur. I think it's allowed to ask questions as well, and Stian is next. So
fully agree. I would just add that a standard, either with a capital S or a small s, since we're in the business of capitalization now, it's not a mechanism for compliance. It's a social agreement of being or doing, and it's an opportunity for convergence. No one pushes anyone to go by a standard, but everyone needs to understand what is the best way of doing it, or at least the agreed way of doing it up to now. So I would like to say that we shouldn't look at standards as a means of compliance necessarily. Yep. We can also have multiple standards, and that's actually absolutely fine as long as they are interchangeable. So not one. So small s, big S. You are better in capitalization.
Yeah, I know the difference very well by now. So, Paolo, you had a question or a remark? Okay, go ahead.
It's about the relation between FDOs and societal development. Because there is a link between research and industry and academia and society. So my question is to the funders and funding bodies, mainly to the European Commission in this case. Can you recognize some kind of responsibilities, societal responsibilities in the funding lines?
Do you mean in terms of funding infrastructure?
Funding lines that then help to produce FDOs, introduction of FDOs, adoption of FDOs, and so on, in this context.
Well, I can say something about funding lines in the sense that it's embedded in the behavior, in the way of planning and programming fundings of the Commission to include cross-cutting thematics such as the engagement with society, such as responding to SDGs, responding to what we call the missions. So going even cross-disciplinary to tackle certain societal challenges that, let's say, as a European public body, the Commission together with all the Parliament and the Council that decide towards the investments, have the responsibility to follow and to, let's say, contribute to. Specifically, we don't fund yet FDOs, and as I said in the beginning, it's, let's say, not in the hands of the Commission, but it is in the hands of the communities that need to represent their needs and need to decide if FDOs is the way to go for them. Then the Commission, for sure, will be able to, let's say, provide any kind of support to within the open science policy that the Commission has embraced. Of course, it's not embedded there, but let's call it about EOSC, no? That is the closest thing. We, within the EOSC line of funding, that is part of the research infrastructures, we have dedicated calls to support the missions. So the 5 missions recognized by within the Horizon Europe program. So yes, there is on that side not only embedded in the program, so the request to pay the highest attention to these societal goals, but also we have dedicated goals within the EOSC environment to support global challenges.
Yeah, and maybe also challenging Karel a little bit, asking Karel to comment. You already said the EOSC is based on FAIR. We need machine actionable units of information. There is already a policy in most funders I know that you want my money, you have to make your data fair and your services. Yes. And of course, there is a big misunderstanding. There is not such a thing as fair and not machine readable. Fair is machine readable. That doesn't mean all data can be fair. A painting or a butterfly or a piece of text will never be fair, but it can still have fair metadata. So we will come back to that in the final session, but I think there is already a very strong commitment of funders to support FAIR, and that can be by direct funding, but also if you do not allow the waste of money anymore, that we lose 10.2 billion, as you know, per year, only in the public sector by not having data FAIR, that you allow this as eligible cost in every project to get assistance to make the data fair. That's my challenge then to Karel. One of the things we have disagreed on forever, and I thought we had left the last one behind yesterday, but there is another one. We said that we
day before yesterday.
Yeah, day before yesterday. Even there we disagree. But we said we need 500,000 data stewards in Europe. that is based on the idea that for every 20 data spitters, we need a professional data steward. Then you get to, dependent on how you calculate, including industry, 500,000 people. Karel thinks it's less. That's not such a big issue. The issue is we need professional people who know how to do this, who know how to actually implement FAIR. And there is not some sort of thing like a digital object that is not FAIR. That's fine. They exist. But there is not such thing as being FAIR without being machine readable. So I think that is already there, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit on your remark on the machine actionable unit of information.
Yeah, let's first go to the numbers, the 500,000, where we disagree. We do agree on 1 to 20. So if you start from a different number of researchers, you end up with a different number of data stewards. So let's not discuss how many researchers there are in Europe, because it's hard to define. But every 20 researchers need one data steward on average. There we do agree. And I start calculating from 2 million and thus come at a smaller number. It's as simple as that. With respect to the fair digital objects and financing, there are opportunities, Paolo, in the new calls that will come for 23-24, definitely FAIR and implementation of FAIR and use cases of FAIR, and thus possible implementation and use cases of fair digital objects play a role. And I would suggest you, as soon as the program is out, or you can find on the internet already the draft program, to look at it and see that there are opportunities for communities to come up with proposals in the calls for 23-24, several of them that will, let's say, absolutely help people to work on machine actionable units of information. The FDO concept, or whatever you called it, is definitely there. So we don't have money as an association, but we do have the, let's say, influence on the program, and I must say to the Commission that we are very pleased with the way they have implemented our suggestions in the last round. Okay. This was a compliment for the Commission.
Thank you.
Stian, your turn.
All right, so I want to bring us back to this point about legal entities, and that's basically what is the framing for what we're talking about here. And EOSC is a good example of that. So forming the legal entities, formalizing the organization that helped influence the funders, getting the funding streams and all that. And I really appreciate the effort that has put in, but it also adds a level of bureaucracy, right? You're forming a structure that means some people are in, some people are out. You have Peter mentioned about membership on Tuesday, right? So as soon as you set some rules, some cannot. Like we in University of Manchester cannot be an EOSC member because our government has kindly assigned us from this lovely legal entity of the EU, right? So the community aspects can suffer if the legal entity becomes too overwhelming. So I think it's important to think about what is the scope of the legal entity and make sure the community can thrive, possibly bypassing the legal entity rules and using it when it's needed, like for funding streams and so on. Absolutely. But the more money and so on you put in, the more kind of potential conflicts and so on you can also build in, because if you're mixing up policy and funding and technical aspects all in one big pot, there's going to be too many conflicts. Yeah. So I wonder if you want to have some thoughts about the scope, especially for FDO here, but also for FAIR in general.
Well, Karel, maybe that's a good point to
maybe
say
let
something
me first
about
ask, you said you cannot be a member of the association because?
Brexit.
Well, UK is not in the EU anymore.
Yeah. But you...
Okay.
Nothing to argue there.
One day. I've been dreaming since '94 when Norway.
You can be an observer, and I can tell you that the observers are as heavily involved as the members are, and I can tell you that the UK has many people on our task forces. We have 13 task forces with more than 400 individuals, and you do not even have to be from a legal entity to be an individual on those task forces. Coming back to a legal entity for the FDOs, my suggestion is rather simple. We have too many legal entities already. If you look at the Netherlands, we have at least 15 legal entities that go about data. We should have maybe 2 or so. It's understandable. They came about over time, and there was a good reason to build them. And it's very difficult to kill them, and it's very difficult to merge them. So if we would start from a greenfield today, we would definitely, many of those would not come to be come to life again. So therefore I'm hesitant in suggesting another legal entity for whatever. Rather look whether you can merge a few and whether you can put this task into an existing legal entity. Actually, we are discussing at this moment in time the period after 2027, when the next framework comes, what the position of the association or a follow-up of the association, or let's say supporting EOSC is a better word than calling it the association, does not necessarily have to be the association, will be. So we're discussing already with the Commission, with the community, with the countries, the possibilities of what after. And we start with what is needed, not with what are the legal entities possible. But in the end, if we make a choice, we have to take that into account as well.
That's
maybe we can use the principle that we heard yesterday from Robert about what is the absolute minimum we need, and make sure we have that also for the legal entities.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's a good bridge to Bob. Bob raised his hand, and because it's rather European here, you know, by coincidence. I think Bob is from NIST in the United States, and he may have additional views.
Yeah, thank you,
as
Barend.
usual.
So yeah, I'm from NIST in the US, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. I'm a member of the FDO Forum Steering Group. I'm a member of RDA Council. So as you mentioned, and CODATA, I chair CODATA task group, so I have many hats to wear. But I want to reflect briefly on sort of a vibe I've been getting here at the meeting. And I talked with Peter about this yesterday. I've talked with several of you about it. I think we need to work harder on transparency and engagement of the community. Many people here came to this meeting not really knowing what it was all about, not being able to see some of the documents that are available. And I think this is a problem in getting acceptance of this. If the community doesn't buy in and doesn't feel like they're participating in the process, it'll be much harder to get them to buy in and accept later. I also really want to reinforce this idea that let's walk before we run. The idea of having some early success stories, use cases. We have some, we need more. And we need them that both work in vertical within a certain community and also horizontal across communities. They're equally important because I come from astronomy, as many of you know, and the Virtual Observatory. And if I went to the astronomy community now and said, well, you have to adopt fair digital objects, they would say, why? We've already got an interoperable system that integrates data across the world. But there could be cases made that this is really important, but it has to be done in a way that really involves communities from the get-go, has everything out in the open, has maximum transparency, and frankly, takes a little bit of the spin and the hype off of it. So that's it's not a question, maybe you all can comment on that, but I think the more that we engage and are transparent, the more likely the whole architecture and approach is likely to be successful.
It's all about expectation management. I just left Gaia X and they are struggling with that also. So what you say is very right. I would not say that this is a pure European or whatever thing. And frankly speaking, to you, coming from Industry 4.0, there's a national platform in Germany. It's not a legal entity. They don't need it, but it's national. They have that with the field labs in Netherlands, Holland. They have it with Alliance Industrie du Futur in France, with CCREF, and so on and so forth. Confidustra is doing it in Italy with Piano Industriale Quattro, whatever it's called in Italian language. So it works national, but the international topic is a problem. And then you're there in Brussels, or are you in Washington, and how to handle it with Beijing? That's a huge discussion, I tell you, it's not easy. And all of a sudden, you're in that big bubble, and you need to balance it out. And that's exactly what he's just saying. So transparency is the only solution. This is our value, that's our USP. You can do it in a different way. China is currently doing it in a different way. If I like it or not, it's totally irrelevant. They're just doing it differently. Transparency and alliances are key to success, in my opinion. Go as far as needed in the pure community approach, and whenever governance structures are needed, and they are needed here and there, open that up. And he's just saying, there are enough. I cannot tell you how many Industry 4.0 associations are now around the world. I would say 100 is not enough, I guess more. And it's very hard to merge them. Yeah, it's really hard, but you can try it. You can at least try it. But if you need one to create, to bring your principles towards the market, so to say, and then you need to do it, right? So that's basically, and if it's a new one, possibly you need to do it. The future will show, right? But start with use cases and real value. What the gentleman from NIST just said, real value in any field, and show that value. I like that term, walk before run. I think expectation management is really, everyone is talking about speed. I think we should talk again about quality in the United States, in Canada, in Europe. That's where we come from. We come from quality.
But that triggers another question that is very important. I had a very long discussion about it with Hillary from RDA at dinner earlier this week. And David is here from WDS. We have Codata Simon. I'm the president of Codata. So these 4 organizations that we mentioned before are, working very hard to look over national boundaries and over silo boundaries and so on. We need international support and coordination for that, to bring people together. And the power to convene is more important than the power to legislate, is a famous statement. And nobody wants to pay for that. We all operate on a shoestring. The offices have 2-3 people that work 80 hours per week, and everybody says, oh, so important what you guys are doing. But there's no payment. So I think that is a problem with the national funding structures. They are mostly concerned with their national business, and then finally we have EOSC bringing this federation together. So I think it is all about mandate and some minimal money. I'm not talking large money, a few people that have the power to bring this community together and to be more transparent, because everybody works their butts off and then they get the complaints that they didn't inform 5 million people. Well, that's not going to work anyway. So is there a way that if the Oscar Group and others and Gaia X or whatever will come out of all this stuff, that if we say there is a mandate now for an international group, not a legal entity, some of us have legal entities or are legal entities, but a mandated group that we entrust with this cross-cutting role, that is not the mandate of individual countries, of individual domains, that there is somewhere some minimal money for these people. I'm not talking for myself. My salary is paid, but it is very difficult to finance exactly that international support and coordination function. So, any ideas or commitments? No, you cannot do that right now. But I think we really need some better coordination. Mandate is even more important than money, but without any money, it will not fly, and it will remain a fragmented community.
So, if I may, I'm not committing. So you are mandating. A principle is fine. I mean, can be taken by any fora, but you need money, and I need to give you. I mean, as a member state, as a research infrastructure, as the Commission, I need to give you something, and you need to sign something. Who signs that? So if you want support, then or you elect some entity among your existing plethora of, let me call it, participants, or you have you need a sort of legal representation. So first of all, elect someone if you want support, and second, yes, if only one asks for support, you will never get it. If 20 ask for support, they are heard, and things, they might arrive from one way or from the other.
Okay, but in our case, let's stick to the 4 organizations. As Karel said, we don't need a 5th one, certainly right now. Of course, we have to sort of compete for money to keep our few staff members in the air. But if what I hear you say is, if you find a way to work more closely together, at least on this topic, I don't care whether money goes to RDA or to Codata or to whatever, as long as we work together and we are collectively seen as the group that advises Oscar and other groups and say, oh, if it's cross-disciplinary, if it's cross-region, if it's cross-national, we have organizations that can help us. And of course, it's our task then to work even more visibly together and showing we are not competing. We are doing this really together. It's something that is probably very important. Karel, you want to say something there?
The funds are there, Barend, and also in the 23-24 calls there will be possibilities for cascading grants. But the issue is not that the funds are not there, the issue is that it's always project money, and you're not going to find a constant source of money for 20 years for this topic at this moment in time. So we simply have to live with that. And what you indeed have to do is find 1, 2 or 3 of the legal entities that are on board of a forum in this case or whatever, which in itself does not need to have a legal entity that represent you and that you trust. Much better than starting another legal entity simply in order to get money from the Commission or from another source. So I think the possibilities are there.
And there's still a plea, maybe somebody from a national funding agency could be here, that I think, as you said in MPOS, we will hear more about that from Stan this afternoon, of course. The Netherlands Platform Open Science is now awarded with funding of 200 million for 10 years. But there is a clear international component there.
Yes.
Because that is the...
Germany has done that, more countries are doing that.
So if we pull that, there should be...
As Dimitris says, it's moving in the right direction. Yeah.
Good. There is 5 minutes left. If there is still somebody who...
I do have a question.
Early break is an option.
I see a question in the very back.
There's a gentleman. Oh, he's waiting since quite a while there.
Okay.
Yeah,
so it's difficult to see with the lights in my face.
I'm sure I'm from the Free University here there in Amsterdam. So my question is probably, well, this is probably the right moment to ask this question. So I'm from China. I really see that it looks like this conference is mostly between the US and Europe. So I mean, I don't really see many African fellows.
Well, here.
Yeah, a few, right? So, yeah. or anyone from China, Tokyo, Japan. Well, so I kind of feel like if you are always calling for international input, then what are the actions to be taken to include also, communities that are in China? Or how do you think, for example, do you envision that this kind of conferences will happen in China in the future, or even Australia, or even Brazil, right? So, do you think there is any concrete action that we can, for example, also train those data stewards that are in China, in different places, so that they can also join this trend of open science, and also convert their things to digital, fair digital objects? And how do you envision, well, as you just mentioned, you see a lot of barriers there in terms of policy, in terms of transparency issues. How do you envision that, for example, at people at your level to take actions to remove these barriers or soften those boundaries, so that it's not only going to be a European / American thing, but also like we are moving together in a global way.
Please allow me to give a high-level answer there. Be ensured, and take my word, that there is no bashing or negative or anything. We were successfully in Europe able, in industry, many other sectors. I'm industry now, so I can only speak for industry, to establish close links with China and exchange on all levels and all topics, standards, norms, regular meetings. Just middle of November, there's a major forum of the two major Chinese normative organizations with Europe. It's happening, yeah, independent of the political situation. However, the colleagues in China are quite stressed, so to say, with changing developments and things. So we don't want to be mean here, so we have to take that into account and balance it out. That's what I try to say. So what happens at the moment is that these channels are open and continued, however, being handled in a different way than we did, let's say, 2016 or 17 or 18, or at least before pandemic. started. And it's quite interesting to see that it's clear to everyone that both need each other, right? So there's no way we need China as China also needs the European markets. The same is valid for the US. And it's not the first time that we are facing political stress. There was also in the years before some stress. We were always able to handle it on a technical, standard, normative topic, and the topic fair was always also in place there, right? But you still have to comply with national laws and national regulations. So you can be conformant with standards and norms, but you have to comply with laws and regulations. And that's where exactly the boundary is. This dance, as we sometimes call it, is very, very time-consuming and challenging. But be ensured the channels are there and they are open and they are played. And I'm not eligible to talk, but I can ensure that same is valid for the United States and Canada. Well, we had some extreme situations, but we are balancing it out. There is no way that we can split the world again into some blocks, right? We have that continent. We need to solve the big problems jointly, right? Climate crisis, etc., etc.
Yeah, and we can talk about it offline. But Jean-Louis from China, who is one of the Oscar group and vice president of Codata, was there online because he's not allowed to travel. There is a global open science cloud project in China, and Chamo is sitting right there, the director of the African Open Science Platform. Of course, there will be a lot of local people that can travel earlier to Leiden. So I would argue that the next meeting next year preferably should be in another region. Okay, but we absolutely in Oscar there's many regions represented already. We need the whole world. That's clear, and science should not be bothered with politics. I hope.
Also in the FDO forum, as you know, we have reached out, but it's difficult.
Yeah.
But there will be, for example, in 2-3 weeks, there will be a workshop or conference in China, which I will moderate together with others, to bring the FDO stuff on top of the game. So it's organized by Chinese colleagues. So yes, what you said, we're doing it. There are always some ripples or so, and it's tough sometimes. And convey the meanings, right, or the messages takes time. I mean, distance is still there, but we are trying to do our best.
I think we started a little bit late, so okay, but your lunch is waiting, I know that. So we have one more question in the back, and and Chamo, of course, Chamo, you'll get the word after that, and that's the last word, okay?
I've got a fairly simple question, I suppose, and also a comment. Maybe what happens here, or often in meetings like these, I'll start with the comment. It seems as if there's a risk of running into a kind of a boys' club, right? Can Bob have a chat? Can Frank have a chat? Can Fred have a chat? You know each other very well, and that can be difficult for young guys like me to then speak up, you know? And maybe that needs some attention.
Oh, he didn't know any of us.
I know
zero. But you're old boys.
No worries, that's just a comment, how it comes across to me. That you can respond however you want. The other question I have is for these use cases, and I totally concur with you need to test things. You can't write them on a piece of paper before you, and then look at them. So do you actively look for these test cases? Do you actively put out proposals, etc.?
Dimitris?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to say that I fully appreciate the sentiment that you have. But I think this is part of a growing community of people, and I think it's logical at some point that personal relationships also come into place. But this should not stop us from putting the right structures of openness to invite others as much as possible to be part of this community. So I fully appreciate that. The second, I would say, yes, it is one of the priorities that we identify implementations of FDOs globally, within domains and across domains, as Bob said before. There are already a lot of communities that either are in the process of implementing or are looking into implementation or are looking into value for future implementation. I heard a talk the other day about statistics. I don't know if that speaker is here. looking about how within statistics, basically, and statistics agencies can implement FDOs. And I've heard a lot of potential new domains that look into that field. So what we need to do from the FDO forum perspective is make sure that we have a mechanism through which we can capture, describe in a consistent and standardized way and promote those implementations to the rest of the world. I don't think we are in a position to validate them at this point, but what we can definitely do is share that with the rest of the community and point to those implementations whenever they exist and however they exist. Okay, I just saw Gwen doing this, and you know, who am I not to listen, but I still want to give one last word to Chamo in the back, and then we call it a day and go for lunch. So, is there a mic for him? And then we...
No, thanks, Barend. Just to echo the sentiment of the Chinese colleague, and also the sentiment that I think you alluded to, I think we also need to accentuate the role of the multilateral organizations like UNESCO, insofar as we have the UNESCO Open Science recommendations. I think the next step would be to develop these toolkits that will help operationalize those recommendations. And therein, some of the things we are talking about should be embedded. I think the International Science Council will also play a very important role. So I think as part of the communication aspect that was alluded to, these things need to come out clearly to showcase that the multilateral organizations are key to this, and we're all in it together. I came through coming here from ICRI in Borno, where there was a very good set of declarations coming out of the meetings there, including the need for collaboration between research infrastructures. So I think these conversations between these different platforms must be had, and we must be thinking about how to concretely implement them. Yep. I'm personally very excited that there is recognition that there must be collaborations between research infrastructures, and indeed that north to south collaborations are key. I would like to see more Africans here, which is why I'm going to offer that after Berlin, this conference must come to Africa in partnership with the African Open Science Platform.
Okay, no objections? Okay,
no objections at all.
So,
on the contrary.
This is a perfect closure of this session, I think. Thank you all very much for the panel, the questions, and of course the flawless organization that says, cut. So, here we are.